The banker kept calling me ma'am like it was supposed to help. He slid the folder across the desk and said my husband had been very consistent. Every Tuesday. For 38 years. I nodded like that was normal. Like I understood what consistency meant in this room. Then he pointed to a line I didn't recognize and asked if I knew why my name wasn't there. I told him it must be a mistake. My husband didn't make mistakes. The banker didn't argue. He just waited. That was when I realized the weekly trips weren't about savings. They were about something I was never meant to see. And whatever my husband had been protecting all those years had just been handed to me instead. The funeral flowers were still on the dining table when I went back to the bank. I wore the same coat I'd worn to the service. It still smelled like lilies and cold air. I told myself this was just paperwork. Accounts to close. Signatures to add. Loose ends that come after a long marriage ends the only way it ever does. The banker greeted me by name. That surprised me. My husband had handled everything for decades. I'd only stepped inside that branch once or twice, years ago, to drop off something he forgot. I sat where he told me to sit and folded my hands the way I always did when things felt unfamiliar. He spoke gently. Slowly. As if volume mattered. He explained the routine first. How my husband came every Tuesday morning. Same time. Same desk. Same envelope. The banker said it with admiration, like it proved something about him. I nodded. Of course he did. My husband was steady. Careful. Proud of being dependable. Then the banker asked a question that didn't fit the story. He asked who she was. I told him there must be a misunderstanding. My husband wasn't the type. He didn't gamble. He didn't drink. He didn't disappear. The banker didn't argue. He opened the folder and turned it so I could see. A name I didn't know. Not a nickname. Not a business partner. A person. An account that wasn't small and wasn't recent. An address that wasn't ours. A pattern that stretched back years, not months. I felt heat rise in my face, the kind that comes when humiliation arrives quietly. When no one is accusing you, but the truth is already sitting between you. I asked if this was legal. The banker said yes. I asked if my husband had broken any rules. He said no. I asked why I hadn't been told. He didn't answer that one. He just said my husband had been very clear about what should happen after. The word after landed heavily. I left the bank without crying. I didn't call anyone. I didn't even open the envelope he handed me. I went home, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the chair my husband used to sit in every morning with his coffee. For 38 years, I had trusted the rhythm of our life. Every Tuesday, he went to the bank. And I had never once asked why. I didn't decide anything that day. I just stopped assuming I knew the man I had buried. And that quiet realization was the first real decision I made alone. I didn't tell anyone what I'd learned. Not my children. Not my sister. Not the friends who kept bringing casseroles and asking if I was holding up. I nodded. I thanked them. I let them talk about my husband like he was still simple and knowable. At night, I lay awake listening to the house settle. Pipes ticking. The refrigerator humming. The quiet felt louder than grief. I replayed small moments from our marriage, searching for cracks I'd missed. Tuesdays came back to me first. How he left early. How he kissed my forehead and said he had errands. How I never questioned it because questioning felt ungrateful. The envelope from the bank sat unopened on the counter for 3 days. When I finally opened it, I didn't read it all at once. I read it in pieces. A page here. A line there. I learned there had been transfers. Regular ones. Not rushed. Thoughtful. Someone else's rent paid. Someone else's utilities covered. Someone else's life stabilized quietly, predictably. I wondered if she knew about me. I wondered if she knew he was dead. The lawyer's letter explained what would happen next. What I was entitled to. What I wasn't. It used careful language, the kind that respects facts more than feelings. It said my husband had set aside funds with instructions. It said I could contest them. It said doing so would take time. Time felt like the only thing I had. I started noticing how people treated me differently now. How quickly advice came. How often someone suggested I sell the house, move closer, let others help manage things. I smiled and said I'd think about it. I stopped committing to anything. On the 4th Tuesday after the funeral, I drove past the bank. I didn't go in. I parked across the street and watched people come and go. I imagined my husband at the desk, saying nothing, doing something that mattered to him. I felt something shift, not anger, not forgiveness. Curiosity. Who had he been protecting? That afternoon, I called the number listed in the documents. It rang twice. A woman answered. Her voice was tired but polite. She didn't sound surprised to hear my name. She sounded relieved. She said she'd been waiting. We didn't talk long. She didn't explain everything. She didn't apologize. She told me there was a child. She told me my husband had promised to take care of things if anything happened to him. I said I needed time. When I hung up, I realized something quietly and clearly. Everyone assumed I would react the way widows are supposed to. Loudly. Emotionally. Immediately. I didn't. I started making lists instead. Accounts. Dates. Names. Not to punish anyone. To understand the shape of a life that had run alongside mine without touching it. And in that understanding, a different kind of power began to form. I didn't rush into anything after that call. That surprised people later, when they found out. They assumed I would react the way grief is supposed to look. Demands. Accusations. Courtrooms. I did none of that. Instead, I slowed down. I reread the documents with a clearer head. I noticed how carefully my husband had arranged things. Nothing sloppy. Nothing hidden illegally. Just separate. Intentional. He hadn't panicked. He'd planned. That told me this wasn't an accident. It was a choice. I met with the lawyer listed in the paperwork. Not to fight. To listen. He explained timelines, trusts, contingencies. He told me what I could challenge and what would likely stand. He also told me something no one else had. My husband had anticipated my reaction. There was a clause that delayed certain transfers. Not permanently. Just long enough for me to decide whether to intervene. A pause built into the system. I didn't tell the other woman about that part. I wanted to understand her life first. Not from suspicion. From context. Over the next few weeks, small details filled in the gaps. A modest apartment. A child in elementary school. A life that ran quietly, without announcements. My husband hadn't lived a double life in the dramatic sense. He'd lived a parallel one. Separate. Contained. I watched how people around me behaved too. Family members started circling. Offering advice. Asking careful questions about finances. Everyone assumed I was overwhelmed. I let them. I stopped correcting assumptions. I let silence do the work. While they speculated, I organized. While they pitted, I learned. While they waited for me to break, I stayed steady. On the 6th Tuesday after his death, I went back to the bank. Same branch. Same desk. The banker recognized me immediately. He asked if I was all right. I told him I was learning. He nodded like he understood more than I'd said. That was when I knew this wasn't about revenge. It was about deciding what truth was allowed to continue moving forward. And I wasn't ready to decide yet. I made my decision on an ordinary morning. No sign. No conversation that tipped the scale. I was standing at the sink, watching water run over a mug my husband used every day, when I realized something simple and unsettling. Whatever I did next would define the last chapter of his life more than the first 38 years ever could. So I chose carefully. I didn't contest the arrangements he made. Not because they were fair. Not because they were kind. But because they were deliberate. He had built a system that would keep moving unless someone stopped it. And stopping it would require me to become someone I didn't recognize. Instead, I adjusted what I could. I ensured the child would be supported, but not blindly. Payments were structured. Oversight added. Education prioritized over comfort. Stability over secrecy. The lawyer handled it cleanly. No drama. No courtrooms. The other woman never asked for more than what had been promised. When I finally met her, weeks later, she didn't defend herself. She didn't explain. She just thanked me for not turning her life into a battleground. I told her the truth. I wasn't doing this for her. I was doing it so the damage would stop where it was. My family eventually learned pieces of the story. Not from me. From paperwork. From shifts they couldn't explain. They waited for anger. For grief that matched their expectations. It never came. What came instead was distance. A new kind. Calm. Permanent. I sold nothing in a rush. I changed nothing out of spite. I kept the house. I kept my routines. I stopped being managed by assumptions about who I was supposed to be now. On Tuesdays, I don't go to the bank. I go for a walk instead. Sometimes I think about how easy it was for my husband to disappear for 1 hour a week and build an entire truth beside our life. I think about how trust isn't broken by one secret, but by the years of silence that protect it. I don't hate him. I understand him. And understanding was the last thing he probably expected me to gain. The world didn't shatter the day he died. It rearranged. And once I learned where everything actually stood, I stopped trying to put it back the way it was. Some systems don't need revenge to collapse. They just need the right person to stop maintaining them.